All right, let's go and get started this morning. Thank you guys for being here, braving this cold weather. We're going to go ahead and continue. We only got a few, maybe 2 or 3 weeks left in this series, so we're going to be wrapping up here shortly. I want to start off with a question. I'll be honest, this one really doesn't tie into the lesson as much, but just a kind of an icebreaker question I want you guys to think about. So with this Christmas spirit, and we're going to be battling some possible noises with the breakfast with Santa here, and that's okay. But I want you to think about this. What is your most memorable gift that you received growing up? Not the biggest or the best or most expensive, but for you, that most memorable gift that really just stuck with you that you were so excited with, okay? So we'll start off with this morning. Takes a second to think about it. While you think about it, I'll share mine because I've had a lot longer to think about it. One of my favorite gifts that just for some reason I was just enamored as a kid is my grandparents one year got me one of those coin sorters. Anybody know what I'm talking about? You put and you kind of stack them. But they gave me that with a shoebox full of coins that they had just saved throughout the year. And I think I thought I was the wealthiest man in the world because I had this box of coins and I could sort them and put them in in those little sleeves or whatever. And man, for some reason, I was so obsessed with that gift. I loved it and loved it, loved it. So that was one that kind of sticks out with me. Who else? Who's got one they remember? A gift they received at Christmas that's just very memorable to you that you receive. All right, going to Steve. Y'all be thinking while Steve shares.
So Jan and I were dating, and she was from the Murray, Ohio bicycle family. Her dad worked there for 100 years, I think. But first Christmas we were dating, I was at her house for Christmas, and she gave me a bicycle, which I'm still shocked by it. So.
Wow.
A big, nice 10-speed Murray bicycle.
There we go. Fantastic. All right. All right. Who else? Tom? Oh, we got one here. I'll come to you next, Tom.
Our first Cocker Spaniel when I was about 2.
Okay.
And then a banana seat bicycle.
Oh, okay. All right. You remember the name of the Cocker Spaniel?
Oh, Blondie.
Blondie. There we go. All right. Tom?
Yeah, this wasn't necessarily my favorite, but it was memorable.
Memorable?
I got the proverbial pony for Christmas. It was a little Shetland pony that was the meanest little thing. It provided me with some training for rodeo, for 10-year-olds or something. That thing would buck, and I don't know if we ever rode it without it going. Anyway, we finally had to just give it away.
That's good. That's good. All right, any others? Memorable Christmas gifts that you received growing up. I don't want to miss anybody. Anybody else got any? What about, I'm going to switch it up just a little bit. What about the most memorable gift that you gave someone? Okay? Any of those that stick out? Most memorable gift that you gave someone. That, again, doesn't have to be the biggest. Sometimes it's not the biggest that has the most impact. But what's the most memorable gift that you've given someone on Christmas? Anybody? I've stumped y'all this morning. Jackie's got one. Here we go.
When I learned to cross stitch, I thought I was just fantastic. And so as I grew up and my friends would get married, I created a design like a bride and groom and the date and everything, and I would cross-stitch that and give them as a Christmas gift. I probably haven't done that in a while, but I used to be very crafty. But anyway, I love to cross-stitch.
Very nice. Very nice. That's cool. Cheer.
This is pretty common, but there was a little girl in Morristown congregation, and her mom, she was a single mom, and we had known her forever. But anyway, I was there when Jennifer was born, and I started giving her a pair of pajamas for Christmas every year, which is pretty common, but that just went on and went on and went on until finally the year she was getting married, Tom said, you probably need to stop giving her pajamas for Christmas.
That's good. Steve.
Yeah, there are a couple. One that I received. I really wanted a 10-speed bike, and I won't mention the brand, but that's more than what my parents normally spent on Christmas. So they made a deal with me. If I would wash the dinner dishes for 6 months, then I would earn the bike.
There you go.
So that's the most memorable one because I also had to work for it. I knew in
some skin in the
advance.
game.
The most memorable gift, and there are several of them, I won't go into the details, but it was the time when you put the toys together on Christmas Eve, and there was this one time that we were working on them, there were several of them, and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning before we got through putting their toys together, and of course the kids are up at 6, so it was not much sleep, but those are the times I remember most, is all the time spent getting ready for the kids to come out that morning.
Awesome, yes, absolutely. All right, any other gifts given? I'll share one. This wasn't a Christmas gift, but this was just a terrible gift that I given, but it's memorable for a reason. But my first mission trip, I went to Mexico. I think I told you some about that story. I went with my mom, and we went to City Children, and you do kind of a tourist day where you go out to the open markets and you can buy gifts. So I bought something for everyone I knew, and I bought something for my granddad, and hopefully this doesn't offend anyone, but it was a horse skin wallet, and it like literally had the horse hair on it. It was hideous. And I don't know what intrigued me to buy this wallet, but I thought of my granddad for some reason. He didn't have horses. I don't know where that came from, but I bought him this wallet and I gave it to him. And I won't forget it because years later, I remember finding him, and he had that wallet, and like the hairs had worn out. And he used that nasty wallet, that disgusting wallet I got him for years. I mean, for years he used it. And that just stuck with me, the fact that he would, just because I give it to him, that he would be willing to use such a hideous old wallet that I got him from Mexico. But anyways, that's one that I gave that sticks out to me for obvious reasons. So, like I said, none of that may not connect exactly what we're talking about this morning, but just kind of want to get us kicked off. We're continuing to talk about the church, and the word we've talked about is continuity, right? How what we see in the book of Acts, and not just the book of Acts, but in the New Testament as the church is formed, as the church lives into what God has called them, it can be unique and maybe feel new in some ways, but it's in line with what God has been doing the entire story. So I've been really trying to show in each part of what we're living into as being the ecclesia, being the assembly, being God's called out people, that has roots and deep meaning that connect throughout the entire story. They were not doing something that's just brand new and out of thin air, and there's this blueprint that just dropped down from heaven, and we're just finding it, that everything is brand new. But no, this is actually something, the phrase we've been using, if you'll remember, is same story, same mission, but God is doing an old thing in a new way. Last week we talked about kind of 3 aspects of this. We talked about the assembly, right? Which is the word ecclesia, which is also where we get the word church, and how this is the gathering of the people. And it wasn't one certain place, whether it was the temple or in their homes. The Lord's people are a gathered people. We went back and talked about the day of assembly, where God's people gathered, right? Anywhere where God's people gathers and God dwells among them, that is the ecclesia, that is the church, that is the assembly, okay? And sometimes we just look at Sunday morning as assembly, but no, it's any time God's people gather together in His name and God dwells with them. And so we kind of see the assembly. The other was the teaching of the apostles, this understanding of discipleship. The apostles, it says in the Great Commission, to teach them everything that I've commanded you, right? Everything I've taught you, you teach to them. That's the idea of discipleship. We see that is what God's people were called to be from the beginning. To be the image bearers of God and to multiply the image of God, to be a light to the nations and to be a blessing to all nations, to live in to God's image and to share that, right? It's exactly what we see the apostles living into. We see it kind of done in this way with deep roots throughout the story of God. And the last one was the table of the Lord. And when we see meeting around the table as this consistent theme throughout the story of God, going back to the Passover meal, but also going back to that special meal in Exodus where God meets with the elders of Israel on the mountain, and God is dwelling with them. Goes back obviously to Jesus in the various ways that He would do ministry around the table, but also to the institution of the Lord's Supper, the meal with those on the road to Emmaus. And so we see deep connections to the table of the Lord, okay? God is doing, same story, same mission, but God is doing an old thing kind of in a new way. So this morning, we're going to look at least two new aspects of this. If we have time, possibly even a third. All these so far, we've been kind of pulling from Acts chapter 2, verse 42, which kind of gives us this deep insight into the formation of the church in this kind of brief passage. So really important moment here. So Acts chapter 2, verse 42, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. And every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. We're probably about to hear some screams from the kids as Mickey Mouse Santa enters the picture here. That's funny. Okay, so pulling from that, fellowship, all right? Right here in verse 42, we see this word fellowship. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship. Anyone have a clue what the Greek word for fellowship is? Koinonia, very good. Yeah, it's koinonia, okay? And I kind of want to spend some time just differentiating. Sometimes we can think of the word fellowship as similar to assembly or ecclesia, but they have kind of, they're connected, but they have very different meanings. And so we have this understanding they're devoted to not just the apostles' teaching, not just learning what they've absorbed from Jesus in their time with Jesus, but it's also this idea of koinonia, this idea of fellowship is deeply important. Koinonia can be defined as the share in which one has in anything. Fellowship includes the bonds that hold the community together. It refers to both the material but also the physical dimensions of a shared life together, okay? A shared life together. So kind of think of it this way. Assembly or ecclesia is that physical gathering of God's people among whom God dwells, where koinonia, fellowship, are the bonds and the commonalities that actually are what hold them together, right? The reasons that they're coming together. So you have the actual physical gathering, and you have, okay, what is it that brings it? What are those commonalities that bring us together? That's our fellowship. This is our assembly, okay? And it's connected with verse 44, where we have this word in common. All the believers were together and had everything in common. Greek word there that's translated as common is the phrase koinos, okay? Same root word that koinonia comes from, okay? So you have this same connected meaning. We have all things in common. We have these commonalities, this fellowship, these things that bring us together, and a lot of them are the things that are mentioned here. We have these rhythms of life that bring us together, that we come together to hear the apostles' teaching. We come together to pray. We come together to be around the Lord's table. We have these commonalities that all come from Jesus, all come from the story, and all these things are what bind us, that bond us together. This is our koinonia. This is our fellowship, and this is such an important part of who God's people are. But what's interesting is kind of how we see this kind of develop in these verses. It says they had everything in common, and they're in verse 45. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. See, the depth of this fellowship isn't just, hey, we have these rhythms of life that we do together, but we want to be together so much so that even the physical possessions we have in common. Like, this is a depth of koinonia, a depth of fellowship that goes just beyond, hey, we believe the same things, we think the same things about Jesus, we worship alike, we have the same spiritual rhythms, we come together for this. No, we're so in depth that we want even our physical possessions to be the same thing, so much so that there's no one around us that has any needs. And that's exactly what happens. You go to Acts chapter 4, verse 32. All the believers were in one heart and one mind, common. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own. They shared everything they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and God's grace was so powerfully at work in them that there were no needy persons among them. What an amazing phrase. They lived in such a way, they had fellowship in such a way, they had commonality, koinonia, in such a way that there was not a single needy person among them. For from time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them, they brought the money from the sales, put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. And it's in this that we see this group continues to grow, right? It's amazing to see this. A few things I want to make note of, and I did put these on the screen, but I'm going to read through these and I'll kind of get some thoughts, okay? Let me read some of this real quick. I'm missing part of this. Here it is. While this fellowship is often conceived in terms of spiritual bonds and relationship, and those are parts of its meaning, the disciples in the early church were committed to sharing their material goods, as we just saw and just read about, and possessions with each other so that no one went hungry or went without basic human needs. In other words, fellowship in the early church was material, physical, and concrete, as well as spiritual and tangible things that we see as meeting together, sharing in that. But it was no more handshake and see you later as we retreat to our homes. It involved a shared life together. Included shared possessions, shared meals, shared prayers. It was authentic community with deep compassion for each other's material needs. And as disciples of Jesus, they were willing to sell their possessions, to divest of themselves, of their own security and comfort, in order to provide for those who needed what they had. The fellowship of the early church was tangible and compassionate. The shared life in which people were willing to sell what they had so others might have what they need. This characterized their communal life. It characterized their koinonia. As a result, people were attracted to them and their community grew. All right? But again, what I want us to see this morning is not only what koinonia, or what the fellowship looked like in the early church, but how this is something that has been part of God's story since the very beginning, right? In fact, if you were to go to the book of Deuteronomy, you would see this. Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 4, and God's design for what the community of Israel, God's community should look like. We see this. However, this is Deuteronomy 15, verse 4. However, there need to be no poor among you. That's the design, right? That we live and we give and we sacrifice in such a way, that we have fellowship in such a way that there is no poor among us. Now, as you read through the story of Israel, this isn't something they always lived up to. In fact, remember, one of the major criticisms of the minor prophets was what? Abuse of the poor, right? They were abusing the poor. I mean, read through Amos and read about just the way they're mistreated. Like, hey, you guys got summer houses, you're living up this, and you're abusing the poor over just money. I mean, they were doing the opposite of this in so many ways. But they said, hey, this has been the plan. This has been the story from the beginning of time, that we would live, that we would have such koinonia, that there was no needy among us. For in the land the Lord your God has given you to possess your inheritance, he will richly bless you. You can look later in Deuteronomy chapter 26, verse 12. It says, when you have finished setting aside a tenth of all your produce in the third year, the year of the tithe, you shall give it to the Levite, the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that they may eat in your towns and be satisfied. Just a few verses, you can look at kind of God's heart for the poor and the oppressed all throughout the Old Testament, that finding koinonia is something bigger than just, hey, we go to church together, right? There's a depth there that we see in the early church, but throughout the story of God. And then in Jesus' ministry, doesn't we see the same rhythms in the climax of the story? And the most perfect picture of what God's will and heart for us is in Jesus, where Jesus says in Luke chapter 12, verse 33, sell your possessions and give to the poor. Verse 21, Mark chapter 10, verse 21. This is Jesus' story about the rich young ruler. Verse 21, he says, Jesus looked at him, loved him, and said, you lack one thing. Go sell what you own and give your money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and then come follow me. So this understanding of koinonia, this understanding of having a fellowship in such a way that we meet the needs of those around us, that we have literally all things in common. The meaning of that word, it's deeper than just material possessions. It's deeper than just economics. I don't want to just get caught up in that. But I do want us to see this call to have these commonalities in fellowship, how fellowship goes deeper than sometimes what we see it as. And we see that throughout the story, same mission, but God is doing an old thing in a new way. All right, any thoughts on koinonia or fellowship before we move on to the next one? Yeah. One more? Remember? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. I can try to repeat. Do you want to recap that? You probably can't better than I can. I was going to go to Acts 4:32, but yeah, share what kind of.
So my question, where it says under 44 and 45, did they sell their property and possessions to the poor, or did they sell and give the proceeds to the poor?
Yeah, I think kind of going to Acts 4, you kind of see for those who sold and brought the money from the sales. So I kind of using the example that happens 2 chapters later, it seems they brought the proceeds from the sale, put it at the apostles' feet, and then you see a distribution of what was needed from there. Kind of going off Acts 4 example, that's what I would say most likely happened, right? Yeah, they sold it and didn't give it all, right? And so you see that example. Yeah, that's right. Now, now when you get to, implications of this, what does that look like for us? I think we, again, need to look at becoming a literal understanding, kind of going back to that blueprint hermeneutic understanding of things versus, what is God calling us to do in here? What is the heart of the desire here? I think the heart of the desire is that there's no needy among you, right?
So why didn't they just give it away to them rather than sell it?
I guess it depends on what their needs were. If their needs weren't land, or maybe they had other needs. I guess the selling of the lands. I don't know. I guess anybody else have an answer for that?
Well,
get of the land.
You could give to more people. If you gave them your land to one, two people, say,
Yeah.
and they may have had land and a house. So by selling it, you can spread it around.
Yeah, I kind of just to repeat what Red said. By the selling the land, you're able to, I guess that word distribute would be kind of the key part there of the ability to distribute to meet whatever the needs are. And they're not specific to the needs. It can be food needs, land needs, house needs, clothing needs. And I don't know. Todd, have you done any historical background to see what that could have possibly looked like? Greg?
Is kind of like my interpretation is trying to like how I guess wrestle with it in current day society. It's like in their time, like we've already said, that they just sold it to distribute the money in ways to help. The same way, like we couldn't when Helping Hurts book, like we can't just give people things without them having the capability of that. We can give them the land, we can give them the horses, we can give them a house, but if they are not capable of maintaining the house, they're not capable of maintaining the land, then we hurt in the helping process. So, like that's how I'm wrestling as far as helping needy in today's age. Is like there's tons of need, but if they're not willing to help themselves, if they're not willing to help others, like how do we help that aspect? And I could be wrong in that thought process, but that's a process I'm wrestling with.
And if you haven't read that book, that's a good point to bring up, because that's an important book on how to be intentional in the ways that you give. Because it goes into one of the key points of that book is when you talk about need, our minds go to physical need and goes to economic poverty. But poverty comes in all sorts and sizes. And then sometimes if you don't address other types of poverty, even if you've met economic poverty, there's not that means to kind of live into what you need to. So when they say that there was no one needy among them, that possibly could go deeper than just physical needs, right? That could go deeper than just economic needs. I think it does go deeper than that. I think obviously spiritually and communally, relationally, those needs were being met. So there's a depth to that. And I think reading books like that are deeply insightful to, sometimes giving without relationship or giving in a very intentional way can do the opposite, can bring about hurt. All right, any other thoughts on fellowship, a fellowship that leads to this type of sacrificial living? It's a challenging call. It's a challenging call. All right, the second thing I wanted to get into here after fellowship is prayer, okay? Going back to verse 42, it says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Some of your versions there in verse 42 may actually say the prayers, okay? And at first that can be confusing, but I think what it's referring to is this Jewish rhythm of meeting at the temple for daily prayers, right? In Acts chapter 3:1, that's actually what we see that's occurring. It says, Acts chapter 3:1 says, one day Peter and John were going to the temple at the time of prayer, which is at 3 in the afternoon. Now, I don't know how that doesn't get picked up in the blueprint. Seems like a pretty viable example, but that's not something we live into, right? But there are many more examples of prayer in the book of Acts. In fact, I mean, it's pretty amazing all the different times we see prayer coming up. This is just a few of them that I kind of want to run through a little bit. In Acts chapter 4 verse 31, this is after that big moment where Peter and John are out ministering and they get arrested and they speak in boldness and they say, we cannot stop speaking about the things that we have seen or heard. And they finally let them go and they come back to the rest of the believers. They tell them everything that happened. And what do? They pray for more boldness, right? They pray that they will preach the word with even more boldness. Verse 31, they prayed and the place they were meeting was shaken and they were all filled with Holy Spirit and spoke the word of God boldly, right? Moment in Acts chapter 25 when Peter's in prison, and it's the church praying for him. So Peter was kept in prison, but the church, the ecclesia, was earnestly praying to God for him. You have the moment in Acts chapter 6, verse 4, where there's some widows that their needs aren't being met. And so instead of that just falling on another role of the apostles say, let us raise up some deacons, let us raise some servants, some people to help with this, some godly men to help with meeting the needs of these widows. So that why? So that we will turn this responsibility over to them and will give our attention to prayer and to the ministry of the word. It was so important for the apostles to have a dedicated time for prayer. I think that's significant. Acts chapter 13, verse 3, when they're sending out missionaries, guess what they're doing? So they had fasted and prayed, they placed their hands on them and sent them off. When they're appointing leaders, Acts chapter 4, verse 23, Paul and Barnabas had appointed elders for them in each church, and with prayer and fasting, they committed them to the Lord in whom they had put their trust. When they're in prison, Acts chapter 16, verse 25, at about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and other prisoners were listening to them. I mean, throughout, and this is, again, not an exclusive list by any means in the book of Acts or definitely in the early church, but we see the God's people are a people of prayer, a deep people of prayer. And I think that's deeply significant, but it's also not unique to what we see in the story of God, right? Think about this. What are some prayers in the Old Testament that stick out to you? You probably can think of some pretty important ones. What are some kind of very deep and meaningful prayers that we see in the Old Testament? Because people of prayer is something God's people have always been a part of. Any prayers that kind of stick out to you, you can think of in the Old Testament specifically? Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
I guess Isaiah came to Hezekiah and said, he was going to die.
Okay.
And Hezekiah prayed, and Isaiah prayed for him, and God said, okay, I'll add 15 years to your life.
Yeah.
And so, doesn't mean that God's going to listen every time, but had he not asked that, he wouldn't have lived those 15 years. I mean, there's a lot of things in the Old Testament that shows the power of prayer.
Very good. Very good. Anybody else? Hannah's prayer. Yep, that's right. Hannah's prayer. You hear the prayers? About that moment in Exodus where Moses prays to God to repent, to change his mind about destroying God's people, right? It's a pretty significant prayer in the story of God. A lot of the Psalms we see, yes, they're songs, but they're prayers to God. They're prayers, they're laments, they're moments of David just pouring out his prayers. Man, I found those so deeply significant and helpful to me. Any other prayers? I think of Solomon's prayer, 2 Chronicles chapter 6. All these different prayers. They're different. So we see God's people, whether it's the Israelites, have always been a people of prayer. And then we obviously see this in Jesus. Have you thought about all the prayers of Jesus in his ministry? Again, this is not an exhaustive list at all. We see this is just from the Gospel of Luke. Jesus prayed at his baptism, Luke chapter 3, verse 21. We see him pray at the Transfiguration. We see him pray in the temple. We see him pray with his disciples. We see he teaches his disciples how to pray. But we also see Jesus pray alone. Right? We see multiple times where Jesus is in prayer to God, just talking with God. You think of that prayer, was it John 17, where he prays for unity. I mean, prayer is a huge part of the ministry of Jesus. And so as we look at that central point, the centrality of the story, as we look at Jesus, we see a person of prayer. So we see God's story, we see a people of prayer, we see this person of prayer, and we see the early church living into being people of prayer, okay? Same story, same mission. God is doing an old thing in a new way, okay? All right, let me see what time we have. If we hit this third one or not. Actually, we probably need to go ahead and hit these other things. Okay, so we're going to skip that for today, but let's end with these three questions we do each week. A lot of stuff we covered, mainly fellowship and prayer, koinonia. What do these things tell us about God, about humanity, and how do they invite us to participate in the story, okay? Because remember, Act 5, which is about the church, this is the act we're in. This is where we step into the story, right? This is where we are in the grand story of God. The story's still going. The story invites us to participate. So we really want to get into that. We're going to talk about some of that in the sermon this morning. But what does this tell us about God, first off? What we can learn about God based on what we've seen throughout the story of God when it comes to fellowship and prayer.
He wants us to talk to him.
Yeah.
Like we do through prayer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we take that for granted sometimes, don't we? Like, how amazing is that? The creator of the world has been intentional about setting up avenues so that we can communicate with him. Yeah, Jan? All about relationship. Yeah, you see that in both of these, right? In the communication aspect, but in the fellowship aspect, deep relationship. Man, God desires a relationship with his creation. Yes, very good. What else does this tell us about God? Anything else? What else does this tell us about God? Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Especially when it comes to those in need, right? You see God's heart for those in need throughout the story of God. And God desires that there are no needy among us. Why? Because not only does he love his creation, but he desires for us to have those relationships with another like you mentioned. Yeah, very good. Okay? Any thoughts on this one? All right, what does this tell us about each other? What does this tell us about humanity? We need each other. Very good, yes. Yeah, we need community. We need fellowship. We need to have these commonalities with one another. And it's deeper. And maybe we spend even almost too much time on that physical possession side because it's way deeper than just that. But we need to have these times together. We need to have fellowship together. We need to have community. We need to share life together. I mean, fellowship's maybe not a super modern word for it. But yeah, I think my generation used that phrase a lot, share life. We want to share life together. But whatever we call it, I think we need that, right? What else? What's this tell us about humanity? Still see anything else? Yeah. Yeah. So just to kind of put that back into words, what Greg's saying is the need for community, right? That we have a tendency to kind of veer away from that. There's the desire and a need that we have to be together, right? Is that okay? Yeah, I think that's a human part. We were created by community for community, right? We were created by the triune God for community, right? And for relationship with God, as was mentioned earlier. All right, this is the important one here. They're all important, but this is really important. Significant this morning especially. But why does this invite us to participate in the story? Or how does this invite us to participate in the story of God? We've seen the stories, we've seen the threads throughout the story of God. We see what God is doing, we see his heart, we see his character, we see our tendencies as humans. What is this inviting us into? What does this invite you into to participate in? Thoughts? Yeah, Rebecca?
I think especially during this season is to look for ways to help others meet their needs.
Yes.
Because there are a lot of people that have lots of needs that we just don't see it on a daily basis in our county.
Yeah.
But we do have people around us that have needs.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. There are needy among us, to put it simply, right? Those needs aren't just financial needs. They're I can't remember the past Surgeon General says we are in an epidemic of loneliness in our country. But there's a vast number of needs. And what are we doing to meet the needs of those among us? And I mean that those within our koinonia, those within our fellowship, our assembly, but those in our community as well. Yeah, especially this time of year. What does that look like? I think it's important. How else does this invite us into the story? Yeah, Jan?
I think it's a bottomless well. There's never a time when we can say we're finished.
Mm-hmm.
There's always going to be somebody else or something else.
Yep.
So it's not like we can say, oh,
Completed.
Yeah.
Job
Wash
complete.
your
Mission
hands,
complete.
yeah.
Yeah.
the mission's never complete.
Yeah, until we see Jesus again, right? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's kind of where we're going to get into this morning is we read a story that's still going on. And so when we talk about same story, same mission, we've never read the end, we've read how it's going to end. We read that in Jesus. But as we're reading the story of God, there's not and the story's over. Okay, we want to do a different story. No, this story is still going. The mission's still going. So it invites participation because, hey, we're into the story now. We're characters in the story, okay? And so we got to live into this. And so I think that's deeply important. Okay, any other thoughts? That's fantastic. That's it. Any thoughts before we wrap up this morning? All right. Any wisdom from Santa this morning? All right, we're going to continue on next week. I think we have, two Sundays left in the year? Is that right? My math's right. Yeah, 2 Sundays left. So we got two left and we're going to kind of wrap up. We're going to get a little bit into the next act, just a hair, kind of more of a teaser of, okay, if we're in Act 5, what is Act 6? What is the telos or the ending? What does that look like? Okay, we're not there yet. But what is the story of God? What does the Bible give us a picture of what that next act looks like? Okay, so hopefully this has been important. The big thing I want you to see is in the Acts. We don't just see all brand new stuff. It's the same story, same mission. God is doing this an old thing in a new way. Okay, so hopefully that's made sense. Thank you guys.